Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Lisa for those that are new here, and welcome to today's day 9 of Black History Month. Today's topic I'm going to be speaking on selective inclusion protects power, not people. And this is also another topic that we're witnessing in real time when we look at society and politics and how we operate. And it's obviously a lesson that has not been learned since the beginning, the founding of this nation, and how we operate not just in this nation, but the world, the lessons of the past. Even though I'm referencing Black History Month for these topics that I'm going to do for the month of February, these topics also relate to past issues of the past and how those lessons have not been learned. As I said before, specifically today's topic and lesson that should have been learned is selective inclusion protects power, not people. Now, this is something that we are, as I said, living in real time. It's something we witness pretty much every day, and we don't even realize that we're witnessing it, depending on who we are and where we work and where we live. And we forget that there's so many forms of discrimination. We're so used to thinking it's because of someone's black or brown, but it comes in different forms, as we all know. But we're so used to, witnessing it, or that we kind of are desensitized to when there are forms of discrimination that are happening or forms of in exclusivity. And for example, I think it's highlighted is when we always hear, oh, the first Black woman or the first woman to take on a position or to hold a position or to achieve a certain milestone. I think that's something that always highlights how there are disparities within every system that we operate in, whether it's in sports, whether it's in entertainment, whether it's in the workplace, as I mentioned, even in religion, when you look at certain sects and beliefs and how women are not in positions of power, or people of a certain faith, may have their beliefs of what different genders or individuals that identify a specific way, where that they should hold power. And then when you do see that there's issues, not issues, but opportunities, finally, when you hear this first person, or this is the first woman, hi, thank you for joining me. And then when you hear of, oh, the first woman to take on this position or to hold this role or to be the governor or to be the first senator of something, or okay, sorry about that. I see that the live is doing its thing again, but thank you for staying with me. I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well also. But as I was saying, when we hear of, oh, the first woman to do this, or the first woman of color, or the first person of color to achieve these things, it highlights how we overlook the continued disparities within our systems and how we operate and how the world operates. There should never be the need to say, oh, the first woman that has achieved this, or the first person of color that has achieved this. We should never even have to focus on that, right? And we should never have to focus on that. It should never boil down to that. And it highlights how when we see those types of things, how it can still, even though you would think it would empower, it can still highlight how that is protecting, power versus the people, because then it still hinders others. There's still ways where it's not breaking down these barriers, if that makes sense. And I can highlight that more in depth by saying, when we see people finally take on these roles, it always highlights the hate that comes forward afterwards. And it's one of those dangerous things about it, because we will have these milestones where people are able to achieve a milestone that we shouldn't even have to highlight with saying, oh, the first person to do this, the first Black person to do this, the first Black person. We should not have to even highlight that first and foremost. And why is it taking that long? Like, we're what, almost 500 years into the founding of this country. but we're just now highlighting that it's this type of first person to do that. That's first and foremost, because that shows the power and the disparities in the systems of how we get to where we are to finally even say that. But then it's always the sad part that comes afterwards, the continued hate and discrimination that comes after that, right? And it's the assumption that we assume that when someone makes it to this role, that that means that there's no such thing as discrimination. And I think that that's one thing that we forget, and we need to learn from our past, and why, like, when we have, specifically I'm speaking on Black History Month as a learning lesson for this, but as I said, it's not just Black History Month, it's just the history of the past. But it's a lesson that we can really learn from this month, and should highlight this month, so that we cannot continue to make these same mistakes as we go forward into the future. And that is, once it's achieved, it doesn't mean that that door has been kicked open and there's not going to be continued disparity. Sorry about that. It keeps kicking me out. It's pissing me off. But when I do these talks, that's what happens. But as I was saying, it does not guarantee that those disparities are over. It only highlights even more how much hate there is in the world. And that's where we need to learn that that's a time to educate, not to continue to ignore. I feel like we kind of go about ignoring or constantly pushing back against hate, versus us teaching and helping others to learn, even though many don't want to learn. Many want to, because there's the fear when it comes with hate, right? So we can continue to teach, which we should not have to teach. Why do we have to always have to teach? Why is it our responsibility to teach, right? But it's important for us to still do those lessons to continue to prevent the past from repeating itself. That's why it's necessary, even though it's daunting, annoying, and it feels like we shouldn't have to go through that continued process. This is another reason why DEI is necessary, and it highlights how it's not just about one specific race, one specific people, it's for everyone. And that's where the lesson gets missed, because so many people are thinking that it's about that group and not another group, when it's really about true inclusivity of everyone. And this is why we have these lessons, and why we have to do these things and continue to teach, even though it can be daunting and it feels as though, why do we have to? But it is a necessary thing. And it's also the only way for people, even when they don't want to listen, to at least see and hear it. And it's in, regardless if they want to take that in or not. But and that's the only way to truly open the door to opportunities for all, and not just protecting one group and allowing suppression to continue. And that's a tricky tightrope, because when we say discrimination, we're really saying fear, right? So that's someone fearing that someone's going to take something from them. And it's forgetting that the history even of us as Black people, we've never tried to take anything. We've always stood in humbleness, regardless of all that we've gone through in this nation. So the idea that we're going to take something really does not match with the history of this country. And Black history shows you that, and how we've gone on even after, once, segregation ended in the late 60s, and we've moved forward. We've only tried to move forward in empowering ourselves and growing ourselves, and, getting to that level playing field. So that's where the misunderstanding and the misrepresentation of the need for fear, only that there's no real opportunity or desire to have true equality. And that's something that must be understood, regardless of how people's feelings get hurt. That's just what it is. It's not about someone trying to take from you. And that's where the power dynamic gets misunderstood, and that fear is only driving chaos, and that chaos is driven by the idea that there can only be one group that is more superior than the other, and then open the door for only a select few, to be included in. You can see it in politics. You can see it everywhere, that the few that make it through, And then that few that's still living in that suppressed mindset, but they're aligned with power, they assume, oh, well, since I'm in the room and I've sort of been given a seat at the table, I sort of have a voice, but I still am not able to drive change. This can even go within the workplace, right? When we get people that truly are great leaders within our workspace, and then they finally get advanced to a supervisor or management position, right? And then once they finally get into this position and everyone has hopes that, oh, they're such a good leader. I'm so proud of them for making this advancement, getting advanced and getting this role. And then once this individual gets into that role, then they can never get leadership to truly help them to better where they've came from. And so, even though you become aligned, you still lack that power. And that's one way for selective inclusion to protect power and not the people. And we see that not only in society, as I mentioned, but also in the workplace. And that's something that we have to learn to dismantle. And only then can we drive actual change. And that's one of the things that it can feel like it's never going to occur, right? Because we've come so far, but yet we've made so little progress, if any, when it comes to actually driving change. Yes, we have conquered, many would say, well, we've had a black person in the White House. And then others will say, well, he wasn't really black, he was mixed, right? So depending on who you're talking to, they already feel as though we still haven't even achieved that goal, right? So even with that, and then once they've entered that, even with that situation, many felt as though it didn't advance all. It mainly focused on certain specific situations to ensure that power stayed where it was. And that's how politics is. And we're not going to get into that the in-depthness, but that's an example of how people feel. Or also when you see lots of leaders and they coming from a diverse background, and then they finally get into a position of power, but no change actually really occurs, right? Even though they understand the things that need to change, there's still not that push or that drive for it to actually happen. And then you find that, oh, well, they're really more aligned with the power side than us anyway. Not always, but a lot of times. Or they're moving forward with driving change, but it turns out that it never was really about us. There always was an underlying issue. So it's one of those things where we always have to recognize that once we notice that things aren't shifting the way we need them to shift, that we have to redistribute our power. And we need to stop focusing on those same people, some of them holding the positions forever and never leaving the seat, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in politics, whether it's in our local operations of how our local towns and governments and all of that, even in our school boards and all of those types of things. I think we become complacent and accept what things are, and we don't move to eradicate and remove those that are not serving us. That is one thing that we need to start doing. We need to start speaking up, not being afraid of how we're going to redistribute and redesign power, so that inclusion actually means that our ideas are included. Inclusion is not just about people, it's about ideas as well. And it's about how we're going to drive change based on those diverse ideas and people. Diverse people means diverse thinking, diverse innovative thoughts and ways of going about things, and a diverse understanding of how we can get to where we need to be. And that's what true inclusivity means. And I think a lot of people think it only boils down to race and gender and culture. It's not just about that, it's about ideas and thinking, because we have to remember that when we're looking at fighting forms of discrimination and things like that, it's all psychological, and it's all a psychological warfare process. So that means that we need diverse thought and diverse thinking. And that first comes with not being fearful of what needs to be said, how it needs to be said, and who it's coming from. And we have to look to other people and not always looking to those that we assume, because they've been in these positions for a long time, that they're truly all about change. Many people hold positions for years upon years, especially when we look at politics, and they're not driving any change. They're pretty much just holding a seat. or even within the C-suite and in leadership positions within our jobs. And they're holding these positions, but they have not really contributed to the understanding of true driving innovation and thought for a business. So that's the highlight of it, is that we need to be more vocal and not fearful of redistributing our power and redistributing who holds power within our businesses, within our governments, within our lives, within our towns and parishes, and everywhere that we live in all aspects of our life. We cannot become complacent to what someone that's holding that position because they've been there for forever, that they know what they're doing, or that they know what truly is needed to drive change. You need to look at the diverse inclusivity of thought, of new ideas, of fresh ideas, of those that are younger, that are coming in and have a true understanding of what is actually occurring right now in the world and society, and even not, and when I'm speaking, not and also in the workplace, of what opportunities are available that can help to move and shift how we operate within our workspace, the types of jobs that we're offering, the type of skills that we need to learn, all of those types of things. So that's what I mean when I say selective inclusion protects power and not people. Because if you're selecting only a certain type of person or a certain type of people that don't really have a true dynamic understanding and a diversity of thought about where we are going in the world as far as innovation and technology, then how are we going to provide new opportunities and even strengthen how we're going about creating and innovating and being strong within? It's impossible, because those that have come, from the 50s, baby boomers and all that, their experiences are not the same as the experiences of my generation. I'm a millennial, or those that are younger than me. Those ideas and thoughts are totally different, and they even clash. This is why even just the idea and the understanding of the word inclusion, depending on who you're talking to, it's a bad word, or it's viewed as it's only to help certain people and not others, or it's only for a certain type of environment and not for other environments. So even that type of understanding highlights how certain power dynamics are upheld, and it's not for the people, because people are diverse. We're diverse not only based on what we look like, what we believe, but how we think, how we create, how we innovate, how we operate, how we even talk, how we understand information, which is why when we go about in our creativity, that it can differ from person to person to person, regardless of if we are from the same background or not, living in the same community. It's still not going to be 100%, because we are individuals, and no two people are the same. How we process, how we think, and this is why inclusivity is important. It's not just about the understanding of how we look, which is the first thought that everyone thinks, or what we believe. It's more than that. It's deeper than that. And that's why change always occurs. And that's why that change shifts power dynamics. And that power dynamics is shifted because it's not going by the status quo, the basic understanding of what we should be doing or how we should be operating in society based on what someone said or what it is assumed that we should do. It's kind of like, and it's just like when we think about how we go about in our careers, and there's always the best practices of, oh, this is best practice, this is what you should do, this is what you should do, right? But mind you, best practices are only based on theory and probability of what has always been done. It doesn't mean that it's going to always be right. And it doesn't mean that what was done in the past is going to necessarily work for the future. For example, when we speak about remote work, which is still a big debate, right? Should we have remote work? Should we not have remote work? It's still one of those things where it's, oh, why is it so hard to understand? We have all this technology, right? But we still for some reason can't understand or fathom why we should have remote work, and it's still this big debate, because everyone is dealing with the idea of best practice, or that status quo, that this is how things should be because that's what it was in the past, and what is in the past doesn't necessarily take us into the future, right? Because we're changing, we're elevating, we're everything around us is different from what was in the past as to what it is now, from how we operate in our lives with the cell phones. Back in the days, they didn't even have a phone, you know. They had the telegram, you know, the little thing with the wire. They did that. And prior to that, you didn't have anything. You using birds for messages and stuff like that, using pigeons. So even that, with the differences in technology, it changes how we operate, which changes how we think. And also that, and it's still how we were communicating even back then with the bird, or you know, the telegram. You're there's different people passing that message, so we're sending messages, and those messages are going into diverse and in different spaces, and communicating through different wavelengths and through different people, you know, because it has to travel to make it to where you need that message to go. And there's different people along that journey, and this is where it also highlights the importance of acceptance of inclusivity, and why it's necessary, and how you have to have that type of understanding and thought, because that's going to shift the power dynamic. Because if the power dynamic doesn't shift and we're still dealing with the same people in operation and the same thought process, we'll never move forward. It'll always be the same. It'll always be a lack of true, you know, understanding of where we are or where we need to go. And that's just one of those things. How do we move forward? Where are we going to do this? How do we do it? It first starts with us not being fearful. As I said before, not being fearful to speak up and say what needs to be said. When you recognize that people are being hindered from where they need to be, you need to speak up, and it needs to be not within your thought process, but with other people. And I think that that's another thing where the fear from speaking up comes from as well, because we're in a time where you're not sure if you can trust certain people, right? It's very scary. And you shouldn't, and trust is at an all-time low. I mean, the statistic, I think, is like, just in workspace in general, it's like 1 in 3 employees only trust their employer. So that's 2 out of 1 people don't trust their jobs or their workers, or their or where they work or anything like that. And the number is even lower when it comes down to trusting your family, when it comes down to specific topics such as religion and politics and things like that, and your ideas. So that shows a shifted, shows how power has a stronghold as well, because everyone's picking sides. But that lets you know that we need to go about redesigning systems. And we can only do that by, as we drive for change, having a plan and a structure for going about implementing the new change. We can't just say we want to get rid of this idea or dismantle this system and not have a way of implementing a new system that's going to be successful, and not just some prop that's not really holding up the ideas that we're looking to drive change with. And that's the importance of things not just looking better without making them different, right? And the idea is to close the gap. And the gap is that inclusivity cannot be something that is feared. And it cannot be something that's been rewritten as if it has nothing to do with everyone. And that's one of the things that we have to move forward with, because we have to remember that we're all leaders, and that being a leader is all about acting and not talking. Hence why I am doing these talks and I'm coming and going on live, because I am a leader and I'm looking to drive change. And I'm looking to drive change by bringing awareness to these topics and helping to highlight the importance of these topics so that I can inspire others. Because only then, when we're able to shift the power dynamic, we will be able to drive change. And that only comes with inclusivity of thought, ideas, and not being fearful to speak up and drive change forward. But that's all I have for today. I hope you can join me tomorrow. Until then, love yourself and others. Bye.